You've been with me so long, I shall be lost without you. When she had first come, all the girls had had shingled hair. Hers was now grey. It must be over 20 years. Goodness, how time flies. That's what they say. This, she thought, was not true either. But in all of the 23 years, she would never have dreamed of arguing with him. She could see now that he was upset. A small pulse at the side of his forehead became noticeable, and any moment now he would run his hand fretfully onto it and up into his hair. "And I suppose," he said when he had finished rubbing his head, "that there's no way that I could get you to change your mind?" She shook her head. "It's Mother, you see. As I said earlier, she can't manage on her own all day any more." There was a short silence as he recognized that they were back at the beginning of the conversation. She moved his Laurelwood cigarette box towards him. She had filled it that morning as usual. It was so much easier for him with one hand than struggling to open packets, and waited while he took one and lit it with the silver lighter that Mrs. Hugh had given him the year of the coronation. That had been the year that the firm had supplied the elm for all of the stools for the Abbey. She had seen the one that Mr. Edward had bought afterwards. Lovely it had looked with its blue velvet and gold braid. She'd felt proud that it was their wood that had been chosen for a piece of history. Her retirement would be full of memories. "I was wondering," she said, "whether you would care for me to assist you in finding a new person." "Do you know somebody who might do?" "Oh, no. I just thought that perhaps I could have helped to sort out the people who applied for an interview." "Oh, I'm sure you'd do that far better than I should." His head was beginning to throb. "Would you like me to open the window?" "Do. No good being hermetically sealed on a day like this." As soon as she had undone the window bolt and heaved up the heavy sash a few inches, the warm breeze carried in with it the staccato, raucous cries of the old news vendor from the street corner below. "Election special! 2 cabinet ministers out! Big swing to Labour! Read all about it!" "Send Tommy out for a paper, would you, Miss Pearson? It sounds like bad news, but we'd better know the worst." She went herself. As Tommy, the office boy, combined being chronically elusive with a capacity for slow motion that would, as Mr. Rupert had once remarked in her hearing, do credit to a 2-toed sloth. She would miss them all, she told herself, trying to spread the awful sense of impending loss. And this was just the beginning of it. There would be a farewell party in the office, everybody wishing her luck and drinking her health, and they might, probably would, have a whip round for a leaving present. Then she would wait for the bus that took her to the station for the last time, walk the 20 minutes from New Cross to Laburnum Grove until she reached number 84, insert the key in the door, then shut herself in, and that would be that. Mother had always resented her because she had been born out of wedlock, was no better than she should be, as Mother would say whenever she got really fed up. She would get out, of course, to go to the shops and to change their library books, and perhaps, occasionally, she might slip out to the cinema, although she was going to have to be very careful with money. By retiring so much earlier than she had meant to, she would be forfeiting quite a proportion of her pension that the firm arranged for all its employees. Holidays, in any case, would be out of the question unless Mother's incontinence cleared up, which she supposed it might do if she was at home all day to prevent it. It had crossed her mind these last weeks that Mother was doing it on purpose, but it wasn't very kind to think like that. When she got back to Mr. Hugh with the paper, it was clear that he'd got one of his heads. He'd pulled down the top blind on the window so that the sun no longer fell across the desk, winking on the large silver inkstand that he never used. She laid the paper on the desk. "Good Lord," he said. "Macmillan and Bracken out. Landslide predicted. Poor old Churchill. It does seem a shame, doesn't it, after all he's done for us?" She left him then, but before settling in the little back room where she typed and kept her files, she did feel it right to say that of course she would stay, anyway until September, and longer if he had difficulty in finding the right substitute. "That's really very good of you, Miss Pearson. I don't have to say how sorry I am that you're going at all." Although he smiled at her, she could tell he was in pain. In the ladies' lavatory, where she went for a short, noiseless weep, the thought flashed through her mind of how different everything would be if she was having to leave her job in order to look after someone like Mr. Hugh, instead of Mother. Oh, it was a ridiculous notion. She couldn't imagine how it had come up. When she had closed the door behind her in the way that she always did when he had one of his heads, she had a dozen ways of showing that she knew about them that used to irritate him beyond measure, until years of familiarity had bred indifference. Hugh pushed away the paper, leaned back in his chair, shut his eyes, and waited for the dope to work. A Labour government, it really looked as though that was the way things would go, was a disturbing prospect. It showed that when it came to the crunch, ideas were more important than people, which, while it might be morally superior, was vulgarly surprising. Churchill was rightly a national figure. Everybody knew about him, his emotional flamboyance, his oratory, his bronchitis, his cigars, whereas very little, and for most people nothing at all, was known about Attlee. The service vote, he decided, must be proving the decisive factor. These ruminations were interrupted by the appearance of Cartwright with his report on the condition of the firm's lorries, which had been causing concern. Most of them had reached a state where they were becoming uneconomic to maintain, but it would be some time before there was any appreciable number of new lorries available. "You'll just have to do the best you can, Cartwright." And Cartwright, whose smile was skeletal, exposing a fearsome quantity of yellowing teeth with the minimum of mirth, finished with his usual complaint about the repainting of the vehicles. Cazalet lorries were blue with gold lettering. They were unique in this respect, since the blue faded so quickly that they needed constant attention. Cartwright resented using his budget on this, particularly with the present antique fleet, but the brig had decreed years ago that the lorries should be blue, and thereby distinguishable from any other lorry on the road. Neither Hugh nor Edward felt that this was a tradition that could be broken, more since their father was no longer able to see that they had done so. "Don't start that one, Cartwright, but lay off repainting until I've been on to Roots to see if they can produce anything for us." "Seddons would be better than commas, sir, if we have any choice, the price of petrol being what it is." "Yes, right, good point." Cartwright said, well, he'd be off then, but showed no signs of doing so. It turned out that he had a nephew due to be demobbed in the near future, the wife's brother's son, he explained. The family lived in Gosport, and he wondered whether there might be a job going at the new wharf in Southampton. Hugh said he would ask his brother, and Cartwright said thank you very much, sir, he'd be obliged. Then he did go. The twinge of irritation and anxiety that Hugh always felt whenever Southampton was mentioned occurred, setting off at the same time a larger and more immediate twinge of the same about Miss Pearson leaving. He did not feel at all like breaking in a new secretary after all these years. "You don't like changing anything, my darling," Sybil had said, when he had exclaimed at her altering the parting of her hair. My God, he wouldn't mind what she did with her hair, if only she was still alive. It was 3 years now, 3 years and 4 months since she had died, and it seemed to him that all that had happened in that time was that he had got horribly used to missing her. This was described by other people as getting over it. At this point he resorted as usual to telling himself that at least she was out of pain. He could never have wanted, could not have borne any more of that for her. It was better that she should die and leave him than continue to be so racked. He finished reading and signing the letters that Miss Pearson had brought in when she gave her notice. She would collect and pack them into their envelopes while he was at lunch. He buzzed her to call a taxi for him and to say that he might be late returning. He was lunching with Rachel. At least it was not going to be one of those alcoholic business lunches that he always found particularly trying after his headaches.